I hope tonight to light a fire in your life. I hope tonight that you will be fired up when you leave. I want you to be energized about the family of God, about the kingdom of God, about the church of God. We're talking in this series, among other things, about growing healthy churches. And this church, for many years, has been a healthy church. But as you know from physical health, past health does not necessarily ensure future health. You've got to be concerned about health all the time if you're going to be healthy. Inevitably, when I get together with a group of preachers, they start telling preacher stories, preacher stories. They're not true, most of them, just so you know. But what I'm going to tell you is going to be true, okay? And I've always said, preachers have almost the best stories about funerals than anybody. But the truth is, funeral home directors have the best stories about funerals than anybody. I love to get with a group of funeral home directors. I was with my friend Bill McDonald, who owns a couple of funeral homes over in Middle Tennessee a while back, and he said, let me tell you what happened. He said, my dad was 90 plus years old, and he said he was still doing funerals. And he said, one day they had a funeral and it had rained that day and it was wet, and they took the casket out to the graveyard and the family gathered around, and he said, you know how we take our handkerchief out of our pocket and wipe off the top of the casket before they let it out? Have you ever noticed that? Why do they do that? They wipe the top of the casket off and then they throw dirt on top of it. I've always thought that odd. But he said he was doing that, and he said when he did that, the ground was wet and he slipped, 91 years old, and he fell into the grave. He's about 4'11". He was gone. And quick as a lick, he picked himself up out of that thing, hopped up, pushed himself up, jumped up, and looked at the funeral home, looked at the grave digger, and said, let her down, guys, everything's fine. Maybe you like this one better. 0 for 1 right now. I was preaching in Nashville. I'd not been in Nashville long. I'd left Hamilton and moved to Nashville to preach in Nashville. And I'd been in Nashville a while, and I got a phone call from a friend of mine named Steve in Hamilton, and he said, my aunt died and we don't have anybody to do the funeral. And would you come back? The funeral is going to be in Tupelo, Mississippi, about 45 minutes from Hamilton. Would you come back and do the funeral? I'd be honored. I said, I think I can do that. It was on a Tuesday. It was at 10 o'clock in the morning, and so I drove back to Hamilton and went to Tupelo for the funeral. The next day before the funeral, the day before the funeral, always 2 days in between, the day before the funeral, I got another call. It was a secretary at Hamilton, and she said, I hear you're going to be in town for Steve's aunt's funeral. I said, yes. She said, well, Sister Waveline died, and the family wanted to see if you would be able to do her funeral. I said, I don't know. She said, it's at 1 o'clock. I said, that's going to be kind of tight, but I think I can maybe make it. So I did the funeral in Tupelo, got in my car. I called Randy Jackson on the funeral home in Hamilton. I said, Randy, I may be late. This is before the days of cell phones. I may be late, but if I'm late, tell the singers to go ahead and start singing. If they have to sing an extra song, I won't be that late. If I'm late, just get them started. I'll just, they won't know I'm late. I'll hide that little area, that little wall they put up to hide preachers. I don't know why they do that in funeral homes, but maybe this is why. They'll never know the difference. And I knew the singers. They were the singers from the church there at Hamilton. They did a lot of funerals. In fact, they were pretty good. They called themselves the Deadbeats. That's the truth. They cut an album, called it The Deadbeats Live. Funeral home singers. But sure enough, I got there. I was just like 3 minutes late. The singers were already singing. I ran inside. Randy handed me the little card. They call it a clergy card, the card that gives you information. I sat down in my little chair there. I stood up to preach the funeral. And they're sitting on the second row, right at the front, was a lady whose funeral I thought I was preaching. What do you do? Y'all close your eyes. We're going to pray. I'm going to peek around here and see who's in the casket. That was shocking. That'll get your heart going. Woodline Funeral Home in Nashville, famous funeral home. A lot of country music stars are buried in the cemetery there. A lot of gospel preachers are buried there. It's a pretty famous, large cemetery. It was an old funeral home, and they decided to redesign it. So they took the paneling and they painted it, and they put chairs in instead of pews, and they put in a real nice video and sound system and everything, which I always think's odd in a funeral home, but it was really nice. 5-disc CD player back when they had CD. This has been a couple of years ago, and so the first funeral they had after they got it remodeled, the family came in and said, our granddaughter, the granddaughter of the lady who died, or the granddaughter, was going to sing a song, and she just doesn't think she can do it. And so last night, when she told us that, we recorded it. So they put the song in disc 1. I've got ahead of myself. There was a funeral before that. The day before there had been a funeral, and they had the lady's favorite song was "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," and so they played that song on the CD player. And the next day is when the granddaughter was there, and the guy running the CD went back, and there was a disc in disc 1, so he put that one in disc 2 and queued it up. Well, it reset, and so when it came time for the funeral, the guy went back there, a different guy went back there, he saw there was a disc in disc 1, he just pushed play. Now, you may be aware the song "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" is song 2 on the CD for The Wizard of Oz. Song 1 is "Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead," which they played. A little bit off. I don't know if you get an upgrade in casket. I don't know what happens, but funerals are interesting, aren't they? There are a number of churches that are having funerals nowadays. And I don't mean by that funerals when a person dies. The church, the congregation has died. Now, before I pull an alarm and try to make you think the church is dying, the church isn't dying, the church can't die. The Lord promised us, I will build my church and even hell won't prevent it. It's going to go forward. The church is always going to advance. Right now, the church is advancing in India and Nigeria and a number of smaller countries, China's not smaller, but in a number of countries, faster than it's advancing in America. But the numbers we are seeing is that for the first time in about 40 years, the church in America, the congregation of the God's people in America, are beginning to grow again. And you say, well, what about these churches that are dying? Well, you know this. Most of them died a long time ago. They just haven't put any dirt on them yet, right? They just finally shut their doors. And the reality is, when I started preaching nearly 50 years ago, there were churches dying then. We're going to talk about living churches and about how a church can be healthy. I'm going to ask you to bear with me for a few minutes. It's going to take me a little while to get going tonight. It was 2006, and a guy named David walked into my office at the Granny White Church of Christ in Nashville, Tennessee, and he said, we are planning a church in Spring Hill, Tennessee, and we would like for you to come be our preacher. And I was happy, and I said, Brother David, you're very kind. I appreciate the invitation, but I'm not interested in moving. 2006. Over the next several years, he came to see me several times. And I'd say, I'm not interested. I'd give him names of other guys, and he'd say, we'd really like for you to come, and I'm not interested. And finally, after a good while, I said, I might talk to you. And we had 3 meetings. And I want to tell you about those 3 meetings in just a minute. But first, side note, and this is important, though it doesn't have anything to do with our lesson. Eventually, I took a step of faith, and I moved to Spring Hill, Tennessee, and was a part of planning that church. And I put this in here because of you. It is essential that as Christians, we take steps of faith. Everything that you do in your life, you could accomplish without God. If you never do anything that requires faith, if everything you do in your life you could do without God, why do you need God? Are you really a person of faith, or are you only a person of sight? Sometimes we have to take steps of faith. And what I've learned is that God always rewards faith. God always rewards faith. And if you're not taking some risk in your life, I'll talk to elders sometimes, they'll say, we just don't see how we could do that. It's a good thing, but we don't see how we could do it. That means that might be the very thing you should do. Sometimes we got to take steps of faith. Now let me be clear. As I talk to you tonight, I am positive, and I am a believer, and sometimes I do see things through rose-colored glasses. But I am aware of this. This church here in Paintsville is not perfect. The church in Spring Hill, Tennessee is not perfect. In fact, there is no perfect congregation of God's people. And if there was, and I became a part of it, it would not be perfect anymore. It'll never be perfect. The reality is that as long as we're in the flesh, there are going to be challenges and problems that we'll deal with. And Jesus is clear, in this world you will have tribulation. There's always going to be trouble in this world. And as you look through the pages of the New Testament, I wish we had a long, long time tonight to spend on this. But we're told about the problems. Are you aware we're told about problems that every congregation in the New Testament had? Every congregation in the New Testament had problems. And we're told about church at Philippi. Grumbling, disunity. There were either two women, or depending on who you talk to, two factions that they named after women. That's kind of weird, like naming hurricanes after women. I understand it, but there are two factions, and these two factions couldn't get along, and they were grumbling and disunity. They were fighting in Philippi, the happiest place on earth. Philippi, right? It's Disney World of the first century. It's a place of joy. But there are two women, two groups that are fighting each other. Galatia, where they're turning to a different gospel. Marvelly says that you're so removed from the gospel to another gospel, which is really not another gospel because there is only one gospel. I preached to you, it says a certified gospel, and he said if anybody brings you a gospel other than the gospel of Christ, let them be accursed. He says it doesn't matter if it's me, I'm an apostle, it doesn't matter if it's some other man. If an angel was to come down out of heaven and hand you some gold-plated stones and tell you it was another gospel, don't listen to him. It doesn't say the gold-plated stones. I kind of threw that in, but it does say angel, which is kind of interesting if you know what I'm getting at there. They left the gospel at Galatia. That's crazy. Ephesus. Have you ever thought about the church at Ephesus? I don't think I've told you about the church at Ephesus. It's such a neat church. You think who was members of the church at Ephesus? Paul was there for 2 years. Remember who he left in Ephesus? Who he put in Ephesus? Timothy. Excuse the language here, but the hottest young preacher in the brotherhood. He was the guy everybody wanted. He was the man. He was Paul's protege. Then you had Apollos there. Apollos. Remember Apollos? Eloquent and mighty in the scriptures. That's the description of Apollos. For a few years, for about 7 years, Dan Winkler was my backup. When I was gone, Dan would preach. For some reason, they wanted me to be gone a whole lot. Couldn't figure it out. I wonder if that's how Timothy felt. Well, I've got to be gone again. Okay, that's all right. Well, Apollos will handle it. It'll be okay. Imagine that guy being in your shadow. Then most people believe that John lived in Ephesus. And that while he was in Ephesus, it's probably when he wrote the Gospel of John. And if John lived in Ephesus and she was still alive, you know who else lived in Ephesus? I gave you a hint there, didn't I? Mary. Imagine, Zach, you get up next Sunday and say, we're going to start a new class today. We're going to have a class on parenting. And Mary's sitting on the second row. It's like, well, I may not want to teach this class. She seems to know a little more about it than most people for some reason. But Ephesus, the book of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, the book of Revelation, in one of the 7 churches, the book of Ephesians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, from Acts chapter 20, almost to the end of the book, it's all about Ephesus. Ephesus. But of all the churches in the New Testament, that's the one that I would least want to be a member at. Remember, Paul weeps because he's not going to see him anymore. But in that weeping, those tears, he says, some of you, from your own selves, there's going to rise people. They're going to hurt the flock instead of care for the flock. And by the time you get to Revelation, you remember the saddest words of any church in the New Testament, you've left your first love. You ever walked in a church building and felt like people there didn't love each other? I have. That's a horrible place to be. Ephesus. Colossae, immaturity and lack of spiritual growth. Corinth, how long you want to be here tonight? Every chapter is a new problem introduced. Some of the chapters have 2 problems in it. We could take forever talking about the problems at Corinth. I mean, they weren't just surface problems. They had deep problems. They had problems like sexual immorality within the congregation. Man, you talk about hurting a church. I was with a church not too long ago where they'd had a challenge where one of the men had affairs with a number of different women in the church. Man, church at Corinth had issues. They had problems. Biggest thing was boasting. They were proud about the stuff they were doing wrong. I mean, it's one thing to be a sinner. It's another thing to be proud of your sin. I do things I shouldn't do, and I'm not proud when I do it, but I'm really heartbroken when I really think about it. Corinth, that wasn't that way. They were proud of their own sin. Thessalonica, the one church in the book of Revelation that really nothing bad is said about them, other than some of them have become lazy and busybodies because they were spending so much time waiting for the Lord's return, they weren't focusing on reality of the Christian life, the day-to-day Christian life. We're told about problems that every church in the New Testament faced. I got a question for you. Do you think that's accidental? I don't. So, don't think that I have my head in the sand when I talk about the church and how beautiful it is and how great it is and what it's supposed to be. Don't think that I'm not aware of the challenges that churches face. I grew up the son of a preacher, and Dad shielded us from so many things that happened in the congregation. And when I first started preaching, I realized the problems the church I was working with had. I thought, I'm in a bad place. And it was only then that I realized every church has issues and challenges that they face. They've had them in the past, they have them in the present, and they'll have them in the future. There are always problems. Back to those 3 meetings. After those meetings, I was excited. I also was a lot younger. And I kept hearing the same thing over and over again. When I talked to groups of the men, there were 7 men total, and I'd get them in little groups at different times, take them to lunch, or they'd take me to lunch. And I kept hearing, as they talked about what they wanted that congregation to be, I kept hearing the same thing, and it seemed rather biblical to me. That we all speak the same thing, that they were on the same page, that they were going the same direction, that they were the same mindset, that they had the same aspirations and goals for the congregation. And so what I did when I finally decided to go there is I came up with what I called the 5 O's of Spring Meadows. The 5 O's of Spring Meadows. So anybody here have kids? If you have children, raise your hand. If you're very good. All right. Anybody here have more than one child? Who here has 2 children? If you have 2 children, isn't it amazing how you can have 2 children and they can be as different as night and day? It blows my mind. It's inevitable. I mean, even twins, they can be as different as they can be. They're just completely different. The way they approach life, the way they handle things, the way they deal with stress, the way they deal with problems, different. What I realized is, when my children were pretty young, was I had a hand in shaping their personality. I had a hand in guiding how they would deal with problems they faced in life. I had a hand in deciding and helping them figure out how to work and the value of work. I had a hand in teaching them integrity or lack of integrity. I had a hand in whatever they were. I was shaping their character. And I started thinking, as I read the book of Revelation, you look at those 7 churches, Ephesus, Smyrna, Sardis, Philadelphia, Pergamos, Laodicea, Thyatira, as you look at those 7 churches. As you think about them, they all had personalities. Philadelphia I've set before you an open door that no man can close. Wow, what a church to be a part of. Church at Pergamum, the church there, you're in Satan's seat, but you aren't compromising the truth. Is it Smyrna or Sardis that you have a reputation you're rich, but really you're poor? Thyatira, I know your labor, your service, your love, your works, your faith. And he says, and the latter is better than the former. They had a growth chart in the foyer. It wasn't a growth of numbers, it was a growth of faith and love and works. And all the numbers were going up. What a place to be. And if churches have personalities, maybe we could help shape the personality of this church that we were helping plant. So the 5 O's, we came up with the 5 O's. And I'm going to give them to you tonight, okay? You've got them on your outline. They're not written down. They're fill in the blanks. So you can fill in the blanks for you real quick as we shape the personality of that church. Number 1, the first O was one book. One book. That seems to make sense, doesn't it? If we're going to be a church and we're going to be a New Testament church, the book ought to guide us. And if we're going to be a church and we're going to stay together as a church, people who don't know each other, aren't kin to each other, are from different cities, different states. At one time we had 5 elders from 5 different states. We had 5 elders, everyone was from a different state. I mean, we're from all over. If we're going to stay together, we better have somewhere we're going to stay together. And we decided if the book is spoken to it, that settles it. If God said something about it, that's going to be how we're going to do it. Now, if God hadn't said anything about it, He's given us freedom. But if God said something about it, that takes care of it. And we've never had a lot of in 20 years now, we've never had a lot of the discussions that young churches have had because the one book has already answered the question. We got a call one time. Somebody said, I hear y'all use instrumental music. I said to the person, we never even talked about using instrumental music. We never even talked about not using it. We're not going to use it because the Bible doesn't say anything about using it. We're not going to discuss it. One book. Second, oneness. Oneness. I go to churches, and inevitably I'll hear somebody say, we all love each other here. And when I hear that, the first thing I thought is, all right, I wonder what else they're going to lie to me about. Because I know we don't all love each other here. We want to love each other. We're trying to love each other. We can say that. But I know me. Sometimes I'm not very lovable. There are 2 people that live inside me. One is Dale Jenkins, the other one is Dale Jenkins. And every once in a while he shows up. I'm not very lovable. You're not very lovable at times. You may try to be lovable all the time, but sometimes you probably aren't very lovable. We're going to try to be one. I love Ephesians chapter 4. Listen to the text. Endeavoring, you know it, don't you? All I had to say is endeavoring. The rest of you quote the whole thing, right? Endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit of the bond of peace. Here's what's neat about that verse. You ready? Watch it. He does not say endeavoring to make the unity of the Spirit. We didn't make the unity. We were united with God's people when we were baptized into Christ. And if you want to be a part of this church, you know how you become a part of this church? You're baptized into Christ. That's all it takes. And the Lord adds you to His church. And we don't have to vote about it. You don't have to wait 6 months or a year. And we do a background check on you and, credit check on you and, put you on the, list. And we don't have to do that. You're baptized into Christ. You're added to the church. He says, endeavoring to keep the unity that the Spirit made. That's our mission. We're trying to be united. The third O was openness. We decided as a church we were going to be open about everything. That we would not keep secrets. Most churches I know, the members think the elders have a bunch of secrets. And most churches I know, the elders don't have a bunch of secrets. Most churches I know, the elders are not sitting back there with some master Trojan horse ready to pull it out and someday spill all the beans on everybody, let them know. It's just not that way. But people think that sometimes. And the reason is sometimes we're not as open as we should be. So we decide we're going to be open all the time about everything. In fact, we even decided we're going to be open about what we wouldn't be open about. That's a good sentence. We're going to be open about what we wouldn't be open about. There are 3 things we will not be open about. We will not be open about financial matters involving helping people. So if we help pay somebody's power bill, we're not going to get up next Sunday and say, we helped Brother Jenkins with his power bill last week. That'd be embarrassing. It would be out of place. You wouldn't want that if it's you. It makes sense. We decided, now, other financial matters we'd be open about. The second thing we would not be open about were counseling matters when the couple or the person did not want it revealed. Some people would come to us and say, we want the church to pray about this. Open. But we just need to talk to the leaders. We just need to talk to the elders. We just need to talk to the preacher. Not open. Third thing, hiring practices for the sake of the person being hired. So if we were trying to hire somebody, we wouldn't tell who we were trying to hire because we didn't want that preacher to get fired. I deal with preachers all the time that get fired because they're talking to another church somewhere. That's not fair to the preacher. And we weren't going to put them in that situation. And we were open about it. We're not going to tell you who we're hiring until we hire them. Those are the three things. Outside of that, you can know anything you want to. The church doesn't belong to us any more than it belongs to you, so we're going to be open. Number fourth O is outreach. And every time I talk about these, I say the fourth one should be the first one, but the first one's already one book, so it can't be the first one. So it ends up being the fourth one, outreach. Everything the church ever does needs to lead a path to getting somebody to heaven. Everything the church does should lead a path to somebody getting to heaven. And if not, we shouldn't be doing it. If you can't figure out how to tie that back to eternity, don't do it. Outreach. We'll talk more about outreach on Wednesday night, if I get back in line, okay? On Wednesday night. The fifth O is opportunities for service. I've worked with churches where people got a stranglehold on jobs and they wouldn't let anybody else do them. And there were people who wanted to do something and they couldn't do it because somebody else had a stranglehold on it. And so we decided we weren't going to do that. If the Lord will let you do it, we'll let you do it. That was kind of the rule we lived by. Opportunities for service. Those were the 5 O's. Those are 5 good O's, aren't they? They're not perfect, but they're pretty good. They worked 95% of the time. They worked. They were good. Over the next 5 years, though, we made a really bad mistake. We appointed elders. We didn't make a mistake. We did what God said to do. We added elders. And you know what those elders did? They added 2 more O's. And we had 7 O's. They added those last 2. 6th one, outcome oriented. That's a great O, isn't it? Outcome oriented. We will investigate everything we do. If God's not told us how to do it, we'll decide if we're going to keep doing it or scrap it. Either keep it, change it, or get rid of it. One of the 3. Outcome oriented. We're going to be outcome oriented about everything. We looked at Bible class. Should we do Bible class? It seemed like a good thing, but the Bible doesn't command you to have Bible class. So should we do it? And if we do it, how should we do it? When are we going to worship? What time are we going to worship? Where are we going to worship? We're going to worship inside or outside? Are we going to have to wear ties or not wear ties? I mean, we've decided we were going to be outcome oriented. And then the 7th O was ownership. The church belongs to the Lord, ultimately. But Paul will talk about my faith. There's a sense in which the church belongs to us as well. I remember one time a guy came into my office and we're having a preacher's luncheon that day, and he arrived 30 minutes early, which really made me mad because I had stuff to do. But he was there 30 minutes early, so I had to entertain him. So we sat down, and he had on this, it was hideous, this ugly orange shirt. And in the center of that ugly orange shirt, it had a big U and a T on top of it. It was awful. I'm joking. I live in Tennessee. I like Tennessee. But I'm smarter than we are. No. So we started talking football because that's what you talk about with guys, right? So we're talking football, and we're talking about, he's saying our team's awful. I mean, they're horrible over there. I don't know what they're thinking. Their offense coordinator's not any good. Their quarterback's not any good. Their recruiting class isn't any good. The coach isn't any good. I don't know what they're going to do. And then I said, our team's won 3 national championships. We have had the number 1 recruiting class for 5 years straight in the country. Our quarterback is a Heisman Trophy candidate. And I don't know if you noticed the difference in what he said and what I said. What he said was always third person, them and they, second person. What I said was first person, we and us. Now, the truth is, he'd never played a game down of football for Tennessee, and I never played a down of football for Alabama. And I started thinking about that in relationship to the church. when it comes to the church, if you're always referring to it as they and them, I can't believe what they are doing and what's going on with them, I don't know. There's probably a problem in your life spiritually. It's our church. It's we and us. You're a part of it. If the church has debt, you're part of the debt. If the church has a problem, you're part of the problem. I mean, it's we and us. We're a part of this thing. And I said, no more. No more. 7 O's. I can't remember the 7 we got now. We talked to everybody that came to that church. We were baptized by the place membership. We give them the 7 O's, and some of the elders had to write them down because they couldn't remember them. And it was no more. 7's enough. Good, perfect, fine. We're not going to have any more. And I said, 7 is a great number. It's a great number. It's a Bible number. It's a number of perfection. And I preached a sermon. Actually, I decided to preach a sermon. I decided I was going to preach a sermon, and I was going to show every time the 7 is used in the Bible. That'd be a good sermon, wouldn't it? So I started looking up. I thought, well, just read them all. So Genesis 1, 7 times God sees the goodness of creation. Genesis 2 and 3, the creation days, 7 a week is 7 days. Genesis 4, 7-fold vengeance on Cain's killer. All right, we're doing pretty well here. Well, that takes you through Exodus 6, or Exodus 12. Now we're through Leviticus, and now we're to Numbers, and I thought we got a problem. That's going to be a long sermon. I can't do it. But 7 was enough. That's all we're going to have. Well, as I've visited churches, congregations these last few years, I've noticed that a lot are healthy. The best practical news I can give you tonight is that a lot of God's congregations are extremely healthy. We get myopia sometimes. We only see where we are. And if it's good, it's good. If it's bad, it's bad. And we think the whole church is that way. And we don't know what's going on around us. I'm telling you. The church is doing really, really, really well in a number of different ways, many, many, many places. 2 things. For the first time in my lifetime, the church is getting younger. In 1972, the Gospel Advocate ran a front page article in the paper, on their magazine called The Graying of the American Church. That stuck with me. In 72, I was 10 years old when I read that thing. And the church is getting older and older and older. But for the first time in the last 7 years, the church has made a shift and is getting younger. The second thing, it's growing. There are new people everywhere. It's amazing to watch that. Now, that's not true everywhere, but it's happening over and over again. And I ask the question, why? Why are some churches growing? Why are some churches doing really, really well? And I like to investigate things. So tonight what I want to do is I want to suggest something to you. What if the secret to church growth and health isn't a method? It's not the latest whatever the brotherhood comes up with and everybody imitates. It's not the latest program. It's not the latest work. What if it's a mindset? What if we learn that it's a mindset that sets the direction of a church? And I started investigating churches, and I started finding that in every church that's healthy, there's usually 1 or 2 or 3 or 6 people that they have this unbelievable mindset. And when those people leave, I can tell you about a church down in Tennessee right now that for 70 years that church did well. And it seemed like about the time one guy died off, another one come up and he had that same mindset. And they go forward. And about 12 years ago, the last one died, and they didn't have any to replace him. And for about 10 years, that church kind of floundered. And then a guy stepped forward. What is the mindset? And so I came up with the 8th O. The 8th O is optimism. Optimism. And I now believe that the tremendous secret to church growth is an optimistic spirit. Healthy, growing churches possess a tremendous spirit of optimism. As we said yesterday, the future is as bright as the promises of God. That's optimism. You see, it's kind of neat. God is an optimist. Have you ever thought about God as an optimist? I love this reality. Romans chapter 5, verse 8. But God commendeth or demonstrates His love for us in that while we were still sinners. I have a friend that preaches this and he says, while we were still Sunday school teachers. No. While we were still saints. No. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Everybody in this room was in sin and Christ died for them. Isn't that cool to think about? God risked His Son on 8 billion sinners. That's how optimistic God is. Peter talks about how in 1 Peter chapter 2, I think it is, the angels, which things the angels desire to look into. My dad used to say, the angels are standing on their tiptoes looking over the rail of heaven, just looking in to watch what's going to happen when Jesus finally came back from the dead. They didn't know. I know God knows, but what a risk. God's an optimist. Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 4. He chose us in Him before the foundation of the world. He believed even before the world began that man would sin and that some would come back to Him, that we would be holy and blameless before Him in love. And I love Philippians chapter 1 and verse 6. It may be my favorite verse in this. We talked about it some Sunday, how He who began a good work and you will see it to completion the day of Jesus Christ. God is an optimist. And this is kind of a neat one too. Jesus is an optimist. Luke chapter 22, getting near the end of his life, He says to Peter, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift each one of you like wheat. That's verse 31. Look at verse 32 and what He says. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. Jesus said, I am so optimistic, Peter, you're going to come back. I prayed, and I know you're going to come back. Strengthen your brothers. That's optimism. There are a lot of other verses. We've got a lot more verses. The reality is the church still belongs to God. And the church, God still wants the church to grow. Churches were not meant to remain stagnant. That's not part of God's plan. Jesus is invested in the growth of His church. I like to say it this way. He's got skin in the game. More than that, He's got blood in the game. He gave Himself for the church, Acts chapter 20, verse 28. Peter writes about it as well. Purchased with His own blood. We have to believe in the church. And you have to believe in the church. Can I emphasize this enough? It is the hope of the world. Some of you will know the name Willard Collins. Brother Collins was one of the great preachers of his day. He preached the Collins Craig Auditorium sermons every night in the War Memorial Coliseum in Nashville, Tennessee. There were between 10 and 15,000 people that would come to hear Brother Collins preach the gospel. What a preacher that man was. He had a booming voice. I mean, he had a huge voice. The guy could preach like nobody I ever heard in my life. By the time I moved to Granny White, he was a little bit older. He was in his 80s. He was a member there. He still had that booming voice, but he'd gotten older and he'd fall asleep during the sermon. And he snored as loud as he talked. And there was I have to say, somebody woke the Collins up and keep on preaching because he's snoring louder than I'm preaching. But he told me one time in his house, I went to visit him. His wife Ruth had died, and I was going to see him, spend some time with him. And Brother Collins said to me, everything good that God wants to accomplish in the world today can be accomplished through the local church. He'd been president of Lipscomb for years and years. But he knew the truth. And if God wants to do something good, He's going to use the local church. And if this world is going to be changed, we have hunkered down too long. We for too long have had a mindset that look what's going on in this culture around us. Our mission is to move the needle, to change culture. Our mission is to change this world, not to let this world frustrate us, not to get angry at this world, but to change this world, to lead this world to the one thing that has hope, the one place where there is hope, the church of our Lord. If you believe in the Bible, you believe the church matters. We don't have time to look at all the verses we have on the screen there, but that's just a sampling of the verses that talk about the essentiality of the church in the world today. And there are a lot of rituals up there, which we had time. We'll look at some of them as we go forward. The reality is that God means for His church to grow. God wants His church to grow. God is more interested in the growth of your church than you are. Daniel, I love the story. Stone cut out of the side of the mountain, a giant statue made of bronze and gold and silver and iron and clay, and it's sitting there. And the king is so proud of this statue that represents all his kingdoms, and the kingdoms will come after him, and he gets to be the base of it. And then Daniel says, God gave you a dream, and the interpretation of that dream is that God took a stone and cut out of the side of the mountain. And that stone hits that statue, and it tumbles it. And that stone grows and grows, and it fills the whole earth. That's the church. I've traveled to 50 countries in my life. And when I go to a country, I already have family there. They're called Christians. It doesn't matter the language, the color of their skin, how much money they have or they don't have. The church is marvelous. It's tremendous. God intended it to be that way. He says, go, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I commanded you. God wants His church to grow. Acts chapter 2, verse 47, the church is to grow. Acts chapter 2, verse 41, the church is to grow. Acts chapter 4 and verse 4, the church is to grow. Acts chapter 5 and verse 14, the church is to grow. Acts chapter 6 and verse 1, the church is to grow over and over and over again. The church is to grow. God intends. Do you think for a minute, do you think for a heartbeat as we stroll through these verses tonight, do you think He would take and spend that much ink to emphasize something He did not believe was significant and important? Man, I get frustrated when people say, all you care is about numbers. That's not true. I care about people, but I do care about one number. The number one. One more soul. One more soul. God cares about numbers. God talks more about numbers than we talk about numbers. God is interested in the growth of the church. And God's people are optimistic. We are. We've got to leave behind survival thinking. We've got to get rid of our defensiveness. We're always on the defense. We're offensive. I used to think that verse that said the gates of hell shall not prevail against it meant that the gates of hell, the gates of heaven were keeping Satan out. But that's not what it says. What the verse says is the gates of hell will not prevail against it. The gates of hell won't keep it out. The gates to hell won't keep us from people who need to be saved. We can go through the gates of hell and rescue people from hell and translate them, Paul would say in the book of Ephesians, into the kingdom of His dear Son. We've got to leave behind the belief that the best days of the church are behind us and know that the best days of the church are ahead. Optimism leads us to believe again and to build again and to grow again. Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 6, the Lord is my helper. I will have no fear what man can do to me. I love it. What mere people can do to me. This is a weird verse, but it fits and it's in my mind every time I preach this. Paul's talking to Philemon about his slave Onesimus, and he's sent Onesimus back with this letter. Onesimus is an escaped slave. I think you probably know this story. And he sends him back to him, and he says, prepare a place for me, for I trust that through your prayers I shall be given to you. More modern translation, make it a little bit easier. What Paul is actually saying is, you've prayed that I can come see you. I've prayed that I can come see you. Go ahead and get the bed ready because I'm going to come see you. That's optimism. Paul's in prison. I'm going to come see you. I think sometimes that we think that optimism is just an emotion. Oh, you're just talking about a bunch of emotions tonight. That's nothing. You'll get over it and move on. Listen, godly optimism is much richer than emotion. This eighth O is an unrelenting optimism grounded not in just emotion, but in the promises of God and the mission of His church and what God intends for this church to be. Without optimism, it would be so easy for us to quit, to throw things aside, to be in despair, to be perplexed, and to just drop it all. Without optimism, we would not think bigger. Optimism forces us to think, what's next? Yeah, we did something good in the past, but what can we do in the future? What's God got planned for the church in Paintsville? Forward, not in the past. I love your past. It's wonderful. God bless you. But what's coming up? What's next for you? Godly optimism says that He can do more than we can think or imagine. What a verse. God can do more than I can imagine. I thought it was going to be this way, but God made it better. Optimism says we still believe in the power of the gospel. Optimism says, and I'm going to get in trouble here, and y'all can fire me, and you won't have to come back tomorrow night. I believe the age of miracles has ceased, but I believe there's still one miracle that happens. I learned in Bible camp when I was a child that a miracle is a supernatural act of God, where God takes the natural, sets it aside, and does something Himself. God still does a miracle today. Every time a person is baptized into Christ, God does something that only God could do that makes no sense in the world except that God can do it. He takes the natural course of things. The law of sin and death, Romans chapter 2 talks about. You sin, you die. And God says, I'm going to supersede that law. I'm going to do something nobody else can do. I'm going to take that man's sin, I'm going to throw it in the water. It's going to be so far away from him, it's going to be as far as the east is from the west. You know, the north and the south, you can figure it out. I can tell you how far it is from the North Pole to the South Pole, but how is it from the East Pole to the West Pole? It doesn't exist. Optimism says we still believe that God has power in His gospel and men can still be changed. We talked about Romans 1 yesterday a little bit. Optimism pushes us to share that good news, to tell others about Christ. This is my favorite sentence in this sermon. I do not know a single pessimistic church that is growing. I know churches that are more progressive, we'd say liberal, than I wish they were, that are growing. I know churches that are more regressive, more conservative than I wish they are, that are growing. But I don't know a single pessimistic church in this world that's growing. Not a single one. That church over here, they may be conservative, but they're optimistic. They have somebody in that church that believes the future is going to be better. They have people in that church going forward. This church over here that's doing stuff that I wish they didn't do, they're growing. And you know why they're growing? They got people that believe in it. Optimism. Optimism is a result of confidence, or you might say it this way. Optimism doesn't mean everything's perfect. It doesn't mean that we don't need to improve. It doesn't mean I even like everything. That's not what optimism does. Optimism means that in God and with God, we have a confident belief that the future can and will be better, and that confidence does affect our emotions, or we might say it this way: I know whom I have believed, and I'm persuaded that He is able to keep that which I've committed to Him against that day. That's how that's how Paul said it to Timothy. So, churches grow when they have an outlook of growth. Thank you for listening today.